Give me a baby, and I can make any kind of man.
What if climate change, as it's being presented today, is nothing more than the solution to the oldest riddle to confound the minds of men? Getting free people to willingly allow a group of managers to control every aspect of their lives.
The green ethic is basically the communist movement painted green.
The idea of the sustainable development is our common enemy. We have to save the planet, we have to save our natural resources. It is a bureaucrat's dream to control carbon dioxide.
The sun is the primary driver of all climate change on the Earth. If you read the climate game emails, they were manipulating the data, they were hiding crucial data that would prove their theory wrong. Follow the money and you'll get the answer to your question. Applies even in global warming and climate change.
The global green ethic is being proliferated through children. You start with the young. Over the years, we have an adult population that feels the same way.
Today our show is about the education, the public educational system, and our guest is Charlotte Isabey. She's a former U.S. Senior Farmer Advisor for the Department of Education, and she wrote a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you very much.
So did I get that right? You were a former senior advisor.
Senior policy advisor, and it's the U.S. Department of Education.
The U.S. Department
under
of Education.
President Reagan.
Okay, glad to get that straightened
Right.
out. The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Why did you write this book?
I started researching education in the early 70s after having returned from Europe. Overseas, actually, I had been in the Foreign Service for at least 18 years. Some of that was spent after I got married and living in Belgium with my husband, but I'd lived abroad for pretty much 18 years. And I came back to the United States and put my children in the public school, and I was absolutely shocked to see what was happening. And I don't think I was alone, that good public school teachers, older teachers, were also very shocked at the things that they were being required to do. And I kept asking questions such as, well, one very interesting little exercise that was in the New Social Studies textbook, which was called World of Mankind, published by Follett, was for the teacher to take the little tots in first grade through town, whatever town it is in the United States, wherever, and ask them to identify the houses in town, the big houses and the little houses. And what do you think they eat in the big house? What do they eat in the little house? And I thought, what is this?
The point being, what?
This is, to create the class system, class warfare, really. And I knew that because I'd lived in socialist countries, so I thought, what is going on here? So I went to the school board meeting, not realizing that I was going to be, I caused quite an uproar, and they hauled me up the flagpole as a censor, because I said, what does this have to do with education? I don't really understand. And I realized then that things had changed. And so then I began to check on other things other than social studies, and I saw that they were planning on easing out the grammar. They were planning on getting rid of ABCD, all these things that were quite traditional and had worked very well. And I went out of the country in when did I leave? 1953. And so I left when we had this great system of education. And
because they were sticking with the basics.
Oh, yes.
They were teaching people how to read, how to write,
That's right.
how to do research.
Yes.
And then you come back, and all of a sudden, instead of focusing on the basics, they're taking kids down the street and saying, well, what do the people in this big house eat? What do the people in this
That's right.
And the point, but what was the point that they would tell the citizens, not class warfare?
Well, that's a very good point you're making. It is, they would say, well, this is a world of mankind. The children have got to understand that there are all different groups of types of income, people who are poor, people in other countries, and later on they were even having the children eating rice for breakfast. And a lot of, the audience saw this. They'd have the children role-playing starving children in Ethiopia or wherever. This is to change their values. The whole purpose of this kind of education, which really is socialization, it's I call it socialism education, really, redistribution of wealth, etc., is to change our children through the schools so that they will be very comfortable living in a socialist world management system. And very clear, the teacher's manual for this particular social studies textbook said, I mean, I don't know that they do that, they're that clear about it anymore. It said it was based on a humanistic curriculum, and they defined that. And they said basically it was children had to be educated to be tolerant of all religions, all lifestyles. They should understand other forms of government, basically.
But that's not a bad thing.
No, it sounds good, doesn't it?
It sounds very good.
Yes, but the point was that they were not emphasizing its constitution. They were not emphasizing rights, absolute moral values at all, right and wrong. And even under the public school system, you know, we had the 10 Commandments hanging in the classroom. No more of that, because you've got to be tolerant of everybody's viewpoint, and everybody means the whole world. So the education from...
So it's taking our culture away from us.
Absolutely taking your culture away. So I became very concerned, and I wrote letters to the paper, and I even ran for school board. I finally got elected after 3 tries. And I did manage to get a lot of the very bad programs out, the values clarification, survival games. They were putting them in where the children decide who's going to be allowed to live and who's going to die, who's going to be in the lifeboat, who's going to be allowed in the bomb shelter. They'd be given a list, a priest, a pregnant woman.
Some people would say that's critical thinking, teaching them how to think.
Well, you're correct. And critical thinking, you see, was the label that was given to the values clarification after the tremendous controversy over values clarification. And it's the same thing. In fact, Lenin coined the word critical thinking.
Is that right?
Yes, and it's non-absolutist thinking that evolves, and it's the dialectic where you have the thesis and the antithesis. For instance, it's wrong to steal. That's the thesis. The antithesis is it's okay. And so you come to the synthesis is sometimes it's okay. And you can do this with anything: stealing, murder, abortion, whatever. And
so there's no right or wrong.
You end up with a synthesis where sometimes it's okay, and then you just keep moving, you know, towards the non-absolutist viewpoint, and you sort of end up where it's okay all the time. So anyway, the textbook was very clear that the goal of this particular social studies program was to, at a very early age, start to change the children's attitudes and values. Really brainwashing. This is what it is. And I recognize that because I had lived in socialist countries, traveled in communist countries. And so this retired teacher came to me. Really nice woman. She was so important in my life, and in everybody's life for that matter. I mean, the book probably never would have happened if it hadn't been for this retired teacher. And she said, "Charlotte, you're absolutely right. I want you to go for some in-service training down east in Searsport, Maine." And she said, "I'm going to pay." And I said, "Well, oh, all right." She gave me a $100 bill. That's a lot back in 1973. Mm-hmm. And I went. And all these people seem very normal, nice teachers, you know, look like your best friend, your neighbor. And the guy who was running it, the facilitator, had this great big textbook that we all got that free. It came part of the package. And it was called Innovations in Education, a Change Agent's Guide.
A change
agent's guide. But the textbook was published and paid for by the United States Department of Education. Mm-hmm. And it was put together by a professor, Ronald Havelock, at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And basically what we were taught was that we were being taught to be change agents, how to go into a community as a teacher, or even some parents are selected, you know, who are all gung-ho for this new stuff. Well, it's not new anymore. They were putting it in the early 70s. Much of it was funded under Lyndon Johnson's Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was passed in 1965, where they changed education from academics basically to behavior modification, which is necessary for the planned economy for school to work. So that's just an aside, and we'll go into that later.
That's how you change people.
Absolutely.
Right. And control them.
And control them. And so he taught us how to identify, say they want to put in a sex education program or a death education program or whatever, and they know that the community isn't ready for that. And so we were taught how to identify the resistors, the potential resistors.
The people that would disagree.
Oh yeah, like me. I mean, it was extraordinary to be trained to identify myself, because I was a big resistor.
But you didn't let them know that.
Oh, no, they didn't know. They thought I was one of them. And so I just was, you know, my hair, my scalp tingled. I thought, what is going on? You know, this is what they do in this Nazi Germany. They do this in communist countries or fascist countries. They identify the resistors. And they keep records on them, and they isolate them, and sometimes they end up putting them you know where. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a resistor. He spent 8 years in the Gulag. And I thought, whoa. And the resistors were these great people, and I only know Maine for that matter, and they were terrific at the time. And they were taking a stand against these programs. And many of them were saying, even if they didn't know what they were, saying, look, wait a minute, we don't have enough time in the school day for reading, writing, arithmetic, history, etc. What are you doing bringing in all of these programs? Sex ed, drug ed, suicide ed, critical thinking ed, values clarification, all these things that, which interestingly enough, and it comes to something like $100 billion a year. And you have homeschoolers and private schools that are doing it on $2,000 a year per pupil.
So we don't need to spend all that money.
We don't, but you see the brainwashing is horribly expensive. And when we think that a program has failed. I mean, I saw these programs in the U.S. Department of Education. In fact, I was relieved of my duties for leaking a very important one. But when we think a program has failed, you and I, to the top educators, not the teachers, the top educators, it's successful. Because that's what they want. And they take their orders not just from the U.S. Department of Ed. I know this because I was there. I know where we got our orders from.
Where?
The UN.
We get it from the UN?
Yes, and this is an international plan, and I just took something off my email today out of England. England is putting in the exact workforce training, the exact standards, the exact teach to the test, which no good teacher wants, teaching to the test. They're going to fire the teachers who won't teach to the test. I mean, and they're going to fire the teachers who don't get the results. What's interesting is if you go back to the late 1800s in England, in my book, they had a form of outcome-based education. And
this is what it's called?
Yeah, well, that's outcome-based education because you're teaching to the narrow curriculum. Just really workforce training skills will be, or attitudes, certain attitudes, get along in a group.
They'll know one area and they won't know what else is going on.
And that we really ought to discuss because people think school to work is probably like vocational education.
But it's not.
No, and it's not, and you don't start vocational education in kindergarten. Going back to...
So it's taking the power away from the parents.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But the parents don't even know that's what's happening.
No, and they trust. They're so trusting. So anyway, I went through that, and then we were also taught how to identify the important people in the community, really good people who want to help and volunteer to be on task forces to implement these things, whether they're Chamber of Commerce, the Rotary, Garden Club, and these poor people have been used. We were trained how to identify them, go to them, get them to take a position in the community because they were highly thought of, people would listen to them.
And what was the mission? What did they tell you was the mission of being a change agent?
Oh, to bring about change.
I want to talk about the Urban Data School, which is a new initiative which we started last year at the Open University as part of a big smart city project, which we have in Milton Keynes. So what I want to talk about is actually the next generation. So we can do a lot of things today in the smart city or in the future city or turn cities into smart cities. What I want to talk about is what do we do that the next generation is actually ready to jump into these developments. And so there are large numbers of kids in Milton Keynes, like in other cities. And if you remember your school education, and it was very similar to my school education, well, my might be a little bit further away than sort of the average here, but there was very little hands-on practical experimentation. I did get to play with computers outside of the classroom and at school. But there is certainly no data education really happening in schools at this moment. Open data is certainly not a topic. ICT computing is just starting to appear in schools, and schools have a hard time. So, the Urban Data School is a new initiative which we are hoping to turn into a venture, a social venture, that turns the increasingly large number of data sets which are available in all the different data stores into a learning resource for kids to make sense of the world and understand important phenomena in the world, in social life, about their own lives. And so we want to connect, our goal is to connect every single school in Milton Keynes physically to the data hub, but more importantly, allow teachers and kids to get access to the data sets and to use them in education, in the formal education, in the classroom. And this is not a trivial challenge, I can tell you. And there are many different aspects around data education and bringing data skills into the schools, learning the raw data skills, how do you actually use data, how to use data as evidence, how do you use data to tell a story, how do you connect data to what you learn in computing, for example, geography, sociology, physics, math. It connects to all these different topics, and we are starting to work with schools. Over the last year and a half, we have started to work with schools, and teachers are excited about this. Not every single teacher, but teachers are in general excited about this and see the potential, but it's a rough going, and we are certainly going forward to make it easier for schools. So here you see some of the kids, relatively young, having some nice spiky graphs about electricity, something which you haven't seen perhaps before. Now, at this point, we actually do everything on paper because we don't yet know what kind of technology actually is required in the classroom. We don't want to bring iPads and application into the classroom before we actually understand what we are doing and what is actually required, what teachers require, what kids want to do. So we're doing exercises, paper exercises, and we bring visualizations into the classroom and so on. And this is exciting because I have kids in this age range and I want to see them something like this. Now what we find is that if you contextualize the data and make it relevant to their lives, then kids really get excited about this. So we brought satellite images into the classroom, which we were working with the Satellite Applications Catapult as part of the Smart City project in Milton Keynes. Now here's an image that identified already all the current or potential solar panels in Milton Keynes on the roofs. Now the first thing kids do is, where do I live? Do we have solar panels? Is it actually on the map? Where's my school? Why don't you have solar panels? So looking at sort of where they live and the local context, and they start looking at it, and they are inquisitive. They want to understand what's going on because it is about them. And that was a very important observation which we made. Open data, urban data is sort of abstract, is over here. Kids are here, so we need to merge that and bring this together. And that is what we are doing now. Now, what are we actually doing? So we're trying to make urban data relevant for education. So we're trying to identify questions which can be answered with the data which we have. For example, you probably, perhaps, or today's kids learn about energy, solar energy, renewables in the classroom, but it's textbook learning and it's pretty much very high level. So here we ask, for example, questions, well, how much solar energy could we actually generate in the whole of Milton Keynes? And the data sets actually give us very precise results. Now, if 6.6 million kilowatt hours per year is meaningful for kids, we don't know yet. It's the education that is required to make it meaningful. We can relate it to homes, how many families can you support, and so on. And we can also look at how much energy could we generate if we put solar panels onto every single roof. Or now with the idea about putting solar panels into windows, we can do that. And we're starting, as we acquire new data sets, we are flying drones and aerial surveys to get heat image materials and identifying the potential for ground heat source. This is more in this direction. But also then we can go, how much CO2 could we actually save in terms of tons that comes also out of this data. It's not directly in the data, it needs to be analyzed. But that's what we're doing with the satellite applications catapult. And you can understand that all of a sudden the city becomes a potential generator of energy which is used in the city, and kids can understand where the potential is and how far away we are. And it's actually relevant and actionable and informs not just their thinking, but probably also their practices. Now here's another question. Do solar panels actually make sense for your family? So where do you live? How much light intensity are you going to get onto your roof, depending on orientation, size, and so on? How does it relate to how you'd use energy? So typically, of course, solar generation has a peak in the middle around noon. Demand is somewhere in the afternoon. Now, this is an important observation kids actually need to make to understand just because you put solar panels on the roof, you don't get necessarily free energy, which you can use. So what can you do? Well, maybe you can shift your demand. We do the washing when we actually have energy. And this is a representation that's also coming from a data set of doing laundry, one family doing laundry across 1 month. And the green represents the amount of green energy they used. And this is an actual data set from an actual household in Milton Keynes, and we have lots of this data which we collected with Eon. And you can see if you shift these things around, and you can reflect on your behaviors, but not just, oh, wouldn't it be nice, and yes, of course, we need to save, but actually you can measure and calculate and understand what kind of impact that actually has. Here's another one. Why isn't everyone driving an electric vehicle? Well, range anxiety, how much do I actually do some driving, and does it fit? So this is another data set. This is based on the underlying data set is 75,000 miles of electric vehicle driving behavior. And this is a representation of 1 day in the life of an electric vehicle owner. This is plugged in, charging. These are all journeys. So this is the electric vehicle usage translated into a clock metaphor. And that also gives you an understanding of daily practices and use of an electric vehicle, so the demand profile. But then you can compare that to raw data, and I know you can't necessarily read this, but here we are looking at how much energy does a home actually generate from solar panel, how much energy is required to drive an electric vehicle, and we can answer the question, can you power an electric vehicle with your solar energy? And the surprising answer is almost yes, except you need battery storage in your home. But a number of households in Milton Keynes generate enough electricity to power their electric vehicle and be happy, do all their daily driving. Now, this is all in the data, and all of a sudden this question becomes not just an esoteric, abstract question, but a very concrete question which kids can argue about. So what are we currently doing, having done all of this stuff, the preliminary work? We're trying to figure out how do you actually teach all these skills, and how do you bring them into the schools. We need to curate data sets, and I mean, certainly the ODI probably knows that, but the number of high-quality, useful data sets is very, very limited. Most data sets have errors in it. Nobody documents anything. So we had data sets where we generated lots of energy from solar panels at midnight, and we figured out, well, something must be going on here. And that was an obvious error, but other errors. But not just energy. Energy is something because we're working with EON, so we have access to this. We are now looking at transport data. So we need to look, and this is hard work, not only to get the data sets, but make them useful, and then understand how do they actually connect to what we want to teach in the school. And finally, a little bit of technology. We are building a platform so that all the schools have access to it, and then hopefully, not just Milton Keynes, but the rest of the world as well. Now, Milton Keynes, I know it's not your favorite place, but it's actually a nice place to live if you live outside. No, I do like it. It's always been a city of the future, and it still is. And we're moving in a different future because we have a smart city program. The Open University, together with a large number of companies, BT, EON, the council very much involved, other universities, Cambridge universities. So luckily we got a huge pot of government funding to do some interesting stuff. And we're trying to do something which actually benefits the city. Now, just very quickly, so Milton Keynes is actually a success story. It's a growing city. It's a very fast-growing city, but it also creates challenges at the same time. And these challenges are sort of in all different areas: physical infrastructure, environmental aspects, citizen services, and to optimize and find the right path forward is actually not very easy. So what a successful city is and the pathways are not very clear, and we're trying to do something in this context that on the one hand has economic benefits, but actually also has environmental benefits. And so that's why this is relevant for the discussion today. Now, if you know one thing about it, Milton Keynes, perhaps it is these pods, and they represent one vision of a smart city. Now, we are going to get these pods in Milton Keynes this year, a few, to test them out and to see how they actually work in a city context. And that's all very nice. I'm excited, and I'm the first one who's going to jump on those. But this just represents one vision of a smart city. Great new technology dropped from the sky onto the city, and then people have to figure out, well, what are we going to do with that? Is that really necessary? It's certainly fun, innovative, creative, and so I'm all for it. Now, here's another vision of a smart city, which you might recognize a little bit more if you're working in data. Now, we are building a data hub for Milton Keynes, and we identify a large number of data sets, and we bring them together, and we make them available. We provide analytical services and so on. And this is ongoing. So this is a physical data hub, but the data collections and the services are really the thing that is important. So you're probably familiar with that. And we have sort of a target of 3,000 to 5,000 different data sets that are relevant and interesting for Milton Keynes. So this is not necessarily a new story because many other cities do that as well, although we do not only focus on open data, but also proprietary data.
Smart cities in the future will take this low power, inexpensive, small technology and basically distribute it everywhere.
These tiny computers record information about their surroundings, information they can send to other computers or to you. Smart Dust on the Tracks will monitor your commuter train so you know if it's running late. Potholes will be able to report themselves and warn your car, and you'll never have to wait for a radio traffic report again.
They're monitoring the flow of traffic and giving you alerts about what route is the right way to go to keep the traffic moving.
Bridges will get a coating of smart dust particles that can warn us when they detect stress fractures, helping avoid deadly collapses. But smart dust will also allow buildings and streets to recognize you and respond accordingly.
I think increasingly the environment will respond to who we are and adapt in consequence.
The city will know where you are if you want it to.
Your workplace will know you. Smart dust at the entrance will boot up your computer. And smart dust embedded in the elevator doors will automatically ring your floor.
Smart dust is going to sense the environment and allow us to improve the way that we live our lives.
No matter how we live in the future city, it will be radically different.
New research in Britain has raised concerns about the potentially harmful effect of nanoparticles. The emerging technology is used in a variety of medicines and even sunscreen. The research found that the small particles could damage the DNA of cells. They're tiny microscopic particles which can store and release drugs in specific areas of the body. As a result, nanoparticles are increasingly being used in medicine and surgery. But because the particles are so small, there's been growing concerns about potential toxicity.
There's an emerging sort of body of evidence that says that for some particles of certain scales and of certain materials, that there are potential health risks.
New British research has added to that concern. It found nanoparticles could damage cells without even entering them. Scientists found the particles change the function of cells and how they communicate with other cells.
What this study shows is that even with a barrier between the blood supply where the nanoparticles are and cells, that there can be damage to cells, and not just a bit of damage, but significant damage to the DNA.
One of the biggest areas of concerns has been the use of nanoparticles in sunscreen. A review this year by the Therapeutic Goods Administration found sunscreen was safe and that the particles didn't penetrate skin cells. If trends in science continue, there's no doubt nanoparticles will be used more and more.
We really need to do fairly sophisticated studies of the toxicity of nanoparticles before we use them extensively in humans.
The TGA says it will monitor scientific literature should any tangible safety concerns be identified. Sophie Scott, ABC News.
All right, so smart dust is a reality, and it's possible that they are already distributing smart dust by way of chemtrails. And real quick, chemtrails are admittedly true, and many people don't believe they exist still. But they most certainly do, and I can prove it in 20 seconds with simple observations. 1. Sometimes chemtrail planes fly parallel to normal planes, and the normal plane clearly shows regular condensation trails. And 2. Sometimes they turn off the chemtrails and turn them back on in midair. So this leads me to my next point. Let's have a look at Morgellons disease.
Good evening. Tonight we're going to focus on a controversial and mysterious condition known as Morgellons. There are thousands who say they suffer from its bizarre symptoms, but there are many in the worlds of science and medicine who believe that it's all in the mind. Well, now the government has weighed in, acknowledging that people are suffering and accepting the need for proper scientific investigation. So the Centers for Disease Control today announced that it would begin a new in-depth study to try and explain this strange condition. My co-anchor Cynthia McFadden reports.
Mary began poring through the medical literature, looking for clues. What she discovered was a 17th century reference to a strange disease with so-called harsh hairs called Morgellons. She named the strange fibers Morgellons disease and put the information on a website. Since then, more than 4,500 people have contacted Mary, claiming they too have Morgellons-type symptoms.
If you do a literature search in the medical literature, there is no Morgellons disease. The skin symptoms fit perfectly with the same group of individual symptoms that we saw in patients with delusions of parasitosis.
Delusions of parasitosis. In other words, it's all in their heads. And despite today's announcement, many doctors remain skeptical that this is a real medical condition at all.
They've pre-decided that these symptoms are too impossible to be real, so they've come to this conclusion that it's a delusion.
Randy Wymore is not a medical doctor, but he is a scientist at Oklahoma State University. He started out as a skeptic too, but years ago, after taking a closer look at the fibers, he changed his mind. And he says other doctors might also, if only they would look.
And the few that have seen patients often have never actually gotten down with either a handheld microscope or a dermatoscope and looked at the patient's skin to see these fibers.
On the day we filmed this, Wymore's colleague, Dr. Rhonda Casey, examined that chronic sore on Drew's lip, which, after 5 years, still had not healed.
Plain as day, definitely a fiber. There are fibers there, and I have never seen fibers in any other child's rash similar to this.
What are the symptoms, and what, from your view, from your studies, what exactly is Morgellons disease?
My view of Morgellons is basically the result of industrialization. The list of symptoms is extremely long. It's almost similar to like a fungal overload, pathogenic overload, and there's so many related symptoms. Some of the more prominent ones being the body actually growing these fibrils or hairs, the body producing artifacts of some kind, whether they're some people, I've even met a couple of people that are producing plant-like material growing out of their skin. There's actually these non-earthling type of insects being come out of their body. I mean, unbelievable stories that I would never have believed it unless I was standing in their house witnessing this. Hexagons, I mean, on our website, morgellonsresearchgroup.com, there's probably 1,000 pictures that you can see. They're real. It's unbelievable. It's like the science fiction channel come to life.
Absolutely, I agree with you, as well.
Can you guys see how all this might tie together? They could very well be distributing smart dust and many other things into our system using chemtrails, sunblock, lotion, other hygiene products, medicine, and even food and drink. Is this part of an ongoing plan to turn human beings into walking receivers that are dumbed down by toxins and filled with heavy metals? Robot zombie citizens that can easily be tracked and identified as they travel through the smart cities?
We have to realize that as robots become more sophisticated, more intelligent, there is a chance that they could become very, very superior to us, in which case we should think about merging with them.
How did your physical self? We would simply implant your memories into a new.
It's all about the parts, and everyone wants them. Whether it's from the latest in designer brands, or whatever you can afford. This is what's in, and this trend is here to stay. I mean, let's face it, no one wants to be like them, entirely organic. No one wants to get sick and old and die. My only choice was to enhance, even if it meant stealing that prototype.
This chip is going to revolutionize the world in so many ways.
How was I supposed to know the damn thing was classified? Now the whole world was after me. The feds, G-Corp, even the Reapers could smell something special inside me. So now I'm in Bangkok. Figured it was my best option. Unfortunately, being here wasn't enough. I was still being followed. I needed to blend in, disappear. So I headed to the nearest street market I could find. You can get anything you want here. From the tuk-tuk driver selling yum-yum chemical massage, to the latest and greatest in virtual drug programs, robot helpers, holographic suit emitters. You name it, they had it. I needed a new look. It was the only thing I could think of to shake them off my tail. Replacing my eyes was the easy part. My skin, not so much. Once the painkillers kicked in, I arranged to meet an old acquaintance of mine. If anybody could get me the new body signature I was looking for, it was definitely X. He insisted on meeting me in a crap hotel in the heart of the red light district. Mr. Foreign Man was passing through, and their eyes burned holes in my pocket. The working enhanced knew how to sell. They could be anything you wanted. Girl, boy, lady boy. I figured I should get off the streets, so I brought Plexi to the hotel room as I waited for X. If my compadre doesn't hurry his ass up, they'll light me up and cut this chip right out of me. Great timing, X. Looks like you just sealed my fate. I was gonna be dead in a matter of seconds. This version of me is, anyway. After all, I am one of them now. The unreal. And being unreal, I guess, does have its perks.
From the day you enhanced, your memories have been storing themselves secretly inside you. Our services consist of backing up those memories for safekeeping. If something were to happen to your physical self, we would simply implant your memories into a new you. That is why it is crucial to sign up for our daily backup program, so you never lose a moment of your life. Strive to live forever, and join the millions of augmented people who have taken this step. You know what to do, Kay. Just click the button below, and all of your fears about death will never haunt you again.
It's him. Take him down.